Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com. Talking once again with immigration lawyer Michael O'Rourke. Michael, how's it going?
Pretty good, Sean. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Talking today about, can I lose my permanent resident status? And of course, the answer is
yes.
Yes, you can. So permanent residents, beware of a few things that we're going to go through on reasons that you could lose your permanent resident status. And Michael, go through a few of these now.
So there are four main ways to lose your permanent resident status. Not enough time is one that we see frequently. There is a requirement of 730 days in 5 years. That it's a mathematical formula and it has some exceptions, but if you don't spend the time, you don't get to keep the status.
Right.
Becoming a Canadian citizen is actually a good thing. So if you technically lose your PR status when you become a Canadian citizen, you even have to cut up your card in front of the immigration judge. But hopefully it wasn't a really good photo, so it doesn't hurt you too much.
Right.
You can renounce your PR status. And you can become inadmissible to Canada based on certain factors like criminality or terrorism or things like that.
Right. So we're going to go through those one by one. I didn't bother making a slide for the Canadian citizenship. I think that's self-explanatory. If you become a citizen, that's the step up and you're no longer the permanent resident. But we do have the enough time spent in Canada. You touched on this. Go through it a little bit.
Sure. So enough time spent in Canada. There is a mathematical requirement that you spend 730 days or 2 years out of every 5-year period to retain your PR status. So there are some exceptions, as I'd mentioned. If you are traveling with a Canadian spouse, you are considered to be in Canada and physically present and have one of those days count, or for each day abroad with your Canadian spouse, you can count those towards your PR status. Same as if you work for a Canadian business or are a worker with either provincial or federal or territorial government, those days also count towards your status. And
Excellent.
it's also important to know for shopping trips to Minot or Blaine or Buffalo or Holton, Maine, or wherever you might be, if you go across the border and you come back and you sleep in Canada that day, it doesn't count against you.
Okay, so those will all add up to your 700. And the other days, not the 730, you can be outside of Canada doing whatever you want, basically.
Yeah, you can do your thing.
Okay. Renounce your PR status. This sounds kind of funny. A lot of people would say, well, why would I do that? But there are reasons.
Yeah, some people do decide that they're just done with it and they want to renounce. Occasionally, we hear stories about overly aggressive CBSA officers who will tell somebody that they appear that they haven't met the time requirement to retain their PR status and give them the option of renouncing. I always say, don't do something like that if you want to still remain a PR, because only a judge can do that. Yeah, we see it more on the U.S. side of the border than on the Canadian side of the border, but it is a possibility. So only a judge can make that, or actually the IRB can make that decision. So if you don't want to give it up, don't give it up. But if you do, then do.
Whenever you hear an official of anything say they're doing you a favor, maybe it's time to call Michael O'Rourke and check it out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. This is the big one. This one comes up a lot, even in conversations that I have, because people see me talking to you on YouTube. And then, of course, they think, you're not a lawyer, but you play one on TV. And they're like, hey, if I get caught in a DUI or if I get in a fight at a bar, can I be kicked out of Canada? So there are certain reasons to be found inadmissible. We'll go through a few of them. But the one I'd like to concentrate on is the committing a crime.
Yeah. And crime can lead to a finding of inadmissibility and can lead to a hearing to determine whether you can remain in Canada, whether your PR is going to be revoked and you have to leave the country. So I need to try and figure out a way, Sean, to work in the it depends.
Right.
But in
Yeah.
general, it really depends on the level of crime that you've committed. Is it serious criminality under the Canada Criminal Code? Is it not? Is it just everyday criminality? Or is it even a crime under the Canada Criminal Code? Because in Canada, we have the federal layer of crimes under the Canada Criminal Code, but then we also have provincial legislation. And if the Crown decides to proceed and charge you with a violation of like the Highway Safety Traffic Act or something on that order, that doesn't rise to the level of criminality that would potentially imperil your PR status. So crime is a big area. There are so many different factors that include what the crime is, what your lawyer can negotiate with the Crown to have the ultimate charge reflect, what the court would potentially convict you of, whether it's serious or not serious criminality, whether it's a first offense or multiple offenses. All of these are factors that can lead ultimately to the procedure to remove your permanent residence and remove you from the country.
Let me give you a hypothetical. Like, what's the process like? So let's say you have too much to drink, you go driving, you get pulled over, you blow over on a breathalyzer, the police charge you. How soon from that does immigration come knocking? I mean, what's the process there that suddenly, you're in the criminal stream, but when does the immigration stream come into play?
It depends. I got you. Okay. Yes, it really does depend. So you're going to be arrested and booked, and then it's going to be referred to the Crown for prosecution. Depending on what ultimately is negotiated between the Crown and your lawyer, and depending on how the Crown proceeds to trial, or if there's a guilty plea, it can really depend. So often we see in at least this area in Ontario, we'll see that if it's a first offense and there's really no other criminality, you've been an upstanding citizen, or not citizen yet, but resident, and there are no aggravating factors like somebody who's injured in or there was an accident, then often maybe you'll get a warning from CBSA, but it gets the immigration stream really starts once the charges are firmed up and the court really makes the plea, so or takes your plea. So it's not going to happen immediately, but by the time you either plead guilty or you go forward to trial, then it could be referred to CBSA. And then,
sorry, Michael, do you ever get called? I mean, how does it work? Someone has a criminal lawyer, and then the immigration stuff starts to pop up. Do they give you a call, or does the criminal lawyer try and handle it themselves? How does it work?
Yeah, usually the criminal lawyers will give us a call, and we can write an opinion letter outlining what the charges are, what we think is going to happen in terms of the immigration process with the negotiated outcome that they're aiming for versus what the black letter law says. Like, okay, if you are found in violation of 39(1) and that's serious criminality, then these are the implications that follow. Yeah, so we do that all the time, actually.
And crime overseas, I mean, permanent residents shouldn't take it for granted that, committing a crime overseas won't have an effect on their permanent resident status. Is that correct?
True. It gets a bit more complex, and usually the rule to remember is that any crime that is committed overseas, when Canadian officials look at that, they look at the equivalent under the Canada Criminal Code. So crime, if you're going to do it, it can have bad effects regardless of where you're doing it.
Right. I mean, permanent resident isn't so permanent. It's more about the residency. And permanent residents are guests, I suppose, for lack of a better word. And it's good to be on some good behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And the other thing that I really want to touch on here,
Sure.
misrepresentation.
Hmm.
So if you have made a misrepresentation in any previous immigration filing, or if you are found to have made a misrepresentation, say in your permanent residence application, that can be more difficult to overcome than a crime, honestly.
Okay. And I have here at the bottom the having an inadmissible family member. The reason I threw that in is because the links on the government site, if you click on inadmissibility, it'll have this. You were telling me off camera that that applies more if you're applying for permanent residency, not necessarily that if your father does something that you're going to lose your permanent resident status.
Exactly. That would be extraordinary. It's more, inadmissible family members are more in applications for visitor status, or if the family is applying for permanent residence and say, depending on the stream that they're applying under, there's a family member that has excessive medical costs, which can be an admissibility factor for Canada. So that's not going to really be included in this group of items.
Right. And as our colleague Marwa Badra pointed out in an article she wrote on LinkedIn, you can obviate all this stuff by getting citizenship, yes?
Yes.
Except, I guess, for the misrepresentation part.
Yeah, and misrepresentation is a death sentence. Basically, it is. If you feel that you might have misrepresented, talk to us.
Right.
Even if there is no prosecution yet, it might come back to haunt you.
Okay. And the way you can talk to him is Michael O'Rourke, MO'Rourke@pacelawfirm.com, or of course, go online, give the firm a call, ask to speak to Michael. He'll be able to answer all of your questions when it comes to permanent resident status. Michael, thanks for this. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Sean. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.